Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. Beloved Heavenly Father, we stand before you today as one family, united in your perfect love. Like the stars in your glorious night sky, we shine in different colors but create one magnificent light. Just as the rainbow needs every color to show your promise, our family needs every heart to be complete. Bless these stories to be bridges between souls, reminding us that love knows no boundaries. Guide us to see each precious life through your eyes of pure love. Amen. My cherished reading family, I would appreciate 2 minutes of your precious time. Your loving support fills my heart with profound gratitude. When you tell me how these stories touch your hearts, how they make you cry, laugh, and believe in love again, you give me strength to keep dreaming bigger and writing deeper. My dear ones, when I see some of our precious white brothers and sisters step away from our journey together, it touches my heart deeply. Look at God's magnificent creation. The powerful eagle soars with both dark and white feathers. The most beautiful music comes from both black and white piano keys playing in harmony. The most precious diamond shines because every facet reflects light differently. These stories come from a heart that sees only the divine light in every soul. Just as love doesn't ask if hands are dark or fair before they help someone in need, these stories don't ask about color before they touch a heart. They are pure love stories, written to remind us that whether we laugh or cry, dream or fear, love or lose, we do it all the same way. I love each and every one of you deeply. Your presence here means everything to me. If my words have ever caused any hurt, I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart. My only wish is to create stories that bring joy and unite us all in the beautiful dance of romance. Please comment below with "I agree" if you believe, as I do, that love is the bridge that connects all hearts. Let's show the world that our family stands united in love and understanding. Today, I'm honored to share a new story with you, crafted with deepest love for our beautiful family. Get ready for a journey that will remind us all why love is the most powerful force in the universe. With profound love and eternal respect, your Mr. Peter. Chapter 1. The Man Who Fled from Women. The setting sun painted Manhattan's skyline in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across Kennedy Clarence's corner office on the 60th floor of Clarence Tower. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching his empire spread out before him like a concrete constellation. At 35, he had built himself into a legend, the youngest CEO to make the Fortune 500, the tech visionary who transformed his father's struggling manufacturing company into a global powerhouse, and the man whose touch turned failing businesses into gold. But legends, he knew, were built on carefully constructed lies. The truth was far more complicated than the glossy magazine covers and breathless financial news reports could ever capture. Kennedy reached up to loosen his perfectly knotted tie, a rare sign of the discomfort he typically concealed from the world. The Italian silk felt like a noose today, much like the burden of his carefully guarded secret. His reflection in the window showed what the world saw. Tall, imposing, with sharp features that could have been carved from marble. Dark hair swept back from a strong forehead, grey eyes that could freeze a boardroom with a single glance, and a jawline that seemed designed for magazine covers. His bespoke Tom Ford suit, in a shade of charcoal that emphasized his commanding presence, fit his athletic frame perfectly. The world saw power, confidence, success. None of them knew about the medicine cabinet in his private bathroom, stocked with EpiPens and antihistamines, or the air purification system that cost more than most cars, or the elaborate protocols his staff followed to ensure he never came into unexpected contact with female employees. The intercom on his desk chirped to life. "Mr. Clarence?" His assistant's voice was carefully modulated, male, as were all his direct reports. Your 2 p.m. is here. Ms. Richardson from Goldman Sachs. Kennedy's fingers tightened on his tie as the familiar sensation began, a slight tightening in his chest, the first warning sign of what was to come. Even the knowledge that a woman was about to enter his space was enough to trigger his body's violent rejection. "Cancel it," he said sharply, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to having his commands obeyed without question. "Sir, this is the 3rd time we've rescheduled. The board is concerned about—" "I said cancel it, James." The words came out like ice. "Send my regrets. Family emergency." Family emergency. His standard excuse. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Clarence family name had opened doors throughout his life, but it had also cursed him with this inexplicable condition. The medical journals had no name for it. His army of specialists had no explanation for why proximity to women, any women, triggered an immediate and potentially lethal allergic response. Hives, difficulty breathing, sometimes even anaphylaxis. It had started in his teens, shortly after his mother's death. At first, the doctors blamed grief, then anxiety, then 100 other conditions. None of their diagnoses stuck, none of their treatments worked. By 20, he had learned to live with it, building his life around this unchangeable fact. Kennedy Clarence could not be near women without his body betraying him. The press called him eccentric. His board called him difficult. Society whispered that he was gay, though his condition affected him around lesbians just as severely. The truth was both simpler and more complex. He was a man apart, isolated by his own biology from half the world's population. He turned from the window and walked to his desk, a massive piece of mahogany that had belonged to his father. The surface was pristine, except for a single folder, today's acquisition reports. Work was his refuge, his constant companion. In business, at least, he could exercise the control that his body denied him in his personal life. The phone rang, his private line. Only 3 people had that number. "What is it, Marcus?" he answered, knowing his oldest friend's number by heart. Dr. Marcus Rivera's voice carried the warmth of 2 decades of friendship. "Your assistant called me. Another cancellation." Kennedy sank into his chair, allowing himself to show the weariness he never revealed to others. "I couldn't risk it. Not today. The symptoms started just from knowing she was in the building." "It's getting worse, isn't it?" Marcus's concern was evident. "The preventive doses aren't working like they used to." "Nothing works like it used to." Kennedy ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its perfect arrangement. "The last attack put me in the hospital for 3 days. If the press had gotten wind of it—" "You can't keep living like this, Ken. Let me bring in Dr. Chen from Johns Hopkins. Her research into psychosomatic—" "No!" The word came out like a whip crack. "No more doctors, no more theories. I've accepted what I am." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Marcus had been there from the beginning, first as the son of the family physician, then as a medical student watching his friend suffer through countless failed treatments, and now as one of the country's top immunologists still searching for answers. "Acceptance isn't the same as giving up," Marcus finally said. "Your father wouldn't have wanted—" "My father's dead." Kennedy cut him off. "And I've built something he never could. Clarence Industries doesn't need me to shake hands and kiss babies. It needs me to make decisions, to lead. I can do that from behind these glass walls." A knock at his office door interrupted them. Through the frosted glass, he could see James's silhouette. "I have to go," Kennedy said. "Don't worry about me, old friend. I stopped needing a normal life a long time ago." He hung up before Marcus could argue and called out, "Come in." James entered with a stack of papers requiring signatures. His assistant was efficient, loyal, and most importantly, understood the rules that governed Kennedy's carefully constructed world. No unexpected visitors, no female employees above the 59th floor, no surprises. "The acquisition paperwork for Jensen Tech," James explained, placing the documents on the desk. And the board would like to know if you'll be attending the charity gala next month? Kennedy's jaw tightened. The annual Clarence Foundation Gala was his personal curse, a necessary evil for maintaining the company's public image. Each year, he made a brief appearance, spoke from a carefully cordoned-off podium, and disappeared before his condition could manifest. Each year, it got harder. "The usual arrangement," he said, signing the papers with swift, decisive strokes. 20 minutes, no close contact, private entrance and exit. "Very good, sir." James gathered the signed documents. "Will you be needing anything else this evening?" Kennedy glanced at his watch. Nearly 7. Another day successfully navigated. Another set of barriers maintained between himself and the world that could kill him with a touch. "No, that's all." He turned back to the window, where the last rays of sun were fading into twilight. "You can go home, James." The door closed softly behind his assistant, leaving Kennedy alone with the empire he'd built and the emptiness he'd never admitted to anyone. From this height, the city lights looked like stars scattered across the darkness, each one representing a life being lived, connections being made, love being found and lost and found again. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, allowing himself a moment of weakness no one would ever see. In the reflection, he could almost see his mother's face, her warm smile, her gentle hands, the love in her eyes before illness took her away, the last woman he had ever been able to touch without his body revolting. "I did it, Mom," he whispered to the ghost in the glass. "I built it all, just like you said I could." But in the growing darkness, surrounded by the trappings of his success, Kennedy Clarence knew the truth that all his money and power couldn't change. He was the man who could have everything, except the one thing every human heart craves most. Little did he know, fate was about to throw his carefully ordered world into chaos in the form of a brilliant, beautiful woman who would challenge everything he thought he knew about his condition and himself. In less than 24 hours, Billy Coco would crash into his life like a hurricane, breaking every rule and protocol his staff had carefully constructed. But for now, in his solitary tower, Kennedy stood guard over his empire of isolation, unaware that his walls were about to come crumbling down. Chapter 2. The Rule Breaker. Billy Coco stood in the shadow of Clarence Tower, her heart pounding with equal parts fury and determination. The morning sun glinted off the building's glass facade, 60 stories of corporate power stretching toward the clouds like a modern-day fortress. She clutched her tablet closer to her chest, feeling the weight of 5 years of research, countless sleepless nights, and the hopes of thousands of patients resting in its digital contents. She hadn't planned to storm the office of New York's most notorious billionaire. That wasn't her style. As the founder and CEO of Cocotech Biologics, she preferred to let her research speak for itself. But when her lawyers had called at dawn with proof that Clarence Industries' pharmaceutical division was attempting to patent a suspiciously similar version of her groundbreaking autoimmune treatment, she knew diplomacy was no longer an option. "I'm sorry, Ms. Coco, but Mr. Clarence isn't taking any meetings today," the security guard at the lobby desk repeated, his expression carefully neutral. "Perhaps you'd like to schedule something through proper channels." Billy's fingers tightened around her tablet. Proper channels. That's what they'd said for the past 3 weeks while their lawyers had worked to steal her life's work. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, baby girl, you got to make your own door when they won't let you through theirs." She straightened her spine, drawing herself up to her full height. In her tailored charcoal suit and stilettos, she cut an impressive figure, not that she'd ever needed clothes to command attention. Her presence filled rooms naturally, a trait that had served her well in the male-dominated worlds of biotech and venture capital. "Listen," she said, letting steel enter her voice. "We both know your bosses are trying to steal my patent. Now, We can do this the easy way, where you call up and tell them, Doctor, Billy Coco is here about patent application KB 2024-789, or we can do this the hard way, where I call every news outlet in Manhattan and tell them how Clarence Industries is trying to rob a black female entrepreneur of her intellectual property. Your choice. The guard's hand hesitated over his phone. Billy could see the wheels turning, the risk assessment, the potential fallout. She had chosen her timing carefully. The morning business shows would love a David versus Goliath story to fill their afternoon slots. "I'll make a call," he finally said. Billy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Smart choice. While the guard spoke quietly into his phone, she took in the lobby's soaring architecture. Everything about Clarence Tower spoke of power and exclusion. The rare marble floors, the abstract sculptures worth more than most homes, the subtle security measures that probably cost millions. This was a fortress designed to keep people like her out. Too bad they didn't know who they were dealing with. The guard's expression shifted as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "Yes, sir. Right away." He hung up and turned to Billy. "Someone will be down to escort you to the legal department on 59. "No." Billy's voice cut through the quiet lobby like a blade. "I'm here to see Kennedy Clarence himself, not his lawyers, not his executives, him. Mr. Clarence doesn't take unscheduled meetings with women?" She arched an eyebrow. "Yeah, I've heard the rumors. Convenient excuse for a man who thinks he's above dealing with people he considers beneath him." The guard's expression remained professionally blank, but she saw his hand drift toward the panic button under his desk. "Ms. Coco, please don't make this difficult." "I'm not the one making things difficult." She took a step toward the elevator bank. "Your boss is about to steal technology that could help millions of people because he thinks I won't fight back. He's wrong." Everything happened fast after that. She saw the guard's hand move, heard the soft chime of an arriving elevator. 2 more security officers emerged from a side door, moving with practiced efficiency. But Billy had grown up with 3 brothers in a tough neighborhood. She knew how to move when she needed to. She was through the elevator doors before they could reach her, jabbing the button for the 60th floor. The guard's shout of "Security breach! On floor 60!" echoed through the closing doors. As the elevator rose, Billy forced herself to breathe slowly, calming her racing heart. The tablet in her hands contained proof, not just of Clarence Industries' attempted theft, but of something else, something she had discovered while researching Kennedy Clarence's notorious aversion to women. If she was right, the connection between her research and his condition could change everything. The elevator's soft chime announced her arrival at the top floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that probably cost more than her first research lab. A male assistant behind a massive desk was already reaching for his phone, panic evident in his movements. "Ms. Coco, you need to leave immediately." She strode past him, pushing open the heavy double doors to Kennedy Clarence's office. And there he was, the man himself, standing by floor-to-ceiling windows, with Manhattan spread out behind him like his personal kingdom. He turned at her entrance, and for a moment their eyes met across the vast expanse of his office. Kennedy Clarence was more striking in person than in his carefully curated media appearances. Tall, with the kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller, he had the sharp features of a man carved from marble and eyes that could freeze hell itself. But it was the flash of something else in those eyes that caught her attention, not just the expected anger or surprise, but a flicker of genuine fear. She saw him take an instinctive step back, one hand rising to his throat where his tie seemed suddenly too tight. The rumors were true then. He really did have some kind of reaction to women, but not quite the reaction she had expected. "Mr. Clarence," she announced, her voice steady despite the security team she could hear approaching behind her. "You're going to want to hear what I have to say before your security throws me out." His response surprised them both. Instead of calling for security immediately, he studied her with those intense grey eyes, even as a visible tremor ran through his frame. "You have 30 seconds before I have you arrested for trespassing." That's when Billy noticed something extraordinary. Kennedy Clarence was still standing, still breathing normally, still forming coherent sentences. According to every report she had read while researching him, he should have been on the floor in anaphylactic shock by now. Instead, he was fighting whatever reaction he was having, and winning. She took a deliberate step forward, watching his response carefully. His breathing hitched, but he held his ground. "Fascinating. Your pharmaceutical division is trying to steal my patent," she said, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the circumstances. "But that's not why I'm really here." 20 seconds, he growled, but she could see the confusion in his eyes. He was feeling it too, the fact that something was different about this encounter. "I've spent the last 5 years developing a treatment for autoimmune disorders that cause the body to attack itself," she continued, taking another careful step forward. "While researching your company's theft attempt, I found your medical records." His face hardened into a mask. "Get her out of here," he commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The security team that had finally caught up hesitated in the doorway, watching their boss with concern. They had never seen him last this long in a woman's presence. Billy pressed her advantage. "Your condition isn't what you think it is, Mr. Clarence, and my research might be the key to understanding why your body rejects female presence. That's what your people figured out, why they're trying to steal my work. They think it might help you, but they're going about it all wrong." She saw the impact of her words hit him like a physical blow. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white with tension. But still, he remained standing. Still, he fought against whatever force usually drove him from rooms at the mere presence of a woman. "Impossible," he whispered, but she heard the question in his voice. The security team finally moved forward, taking her arms firmly but not roughly. As they began to pull her away, she locked eyes with Kennedy one last time. "Check the research yourself," she called out. "Patent application KB 2024-789. Compare it to your symptoms. You know where to find me when you're ready to talk." As the security team escorted her to the elevator, Billy caught one last glimpse of Kennedy Clarence through the closing office doors. He had sunk into his chair, loosening his tie with trembling fingers, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that suggested she had shaken his world to its foundations. In the elevator, surrounded by stern-faced security officers, Billy allowed herself a small smile. She hadn't expected to get through to him on the first try, but she had planted the seed of doubt in his mind, and more importantly, she had proven something she had only theorized about from her research. Kennedy Clarence's condition wasn't purely physical. The way he had fought through it, the fact that he had remained conscious and coherent throughout their encounter, it all supported her hypothesis. The lobby doors opened to reveal a cluster of worried-looking executives and more security personnel. As they escorted her from the building, she heard one of them speaking urgently into a phone. "Yes, sir. Mr. Clarence is conscious. No medical intervention needed. It's unprecedented." Stepping into the bright Manhattan morning, Billy straightened her jacket and checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her lawyers, probably warning her not to do exactly what she had just done. She would deal with them later. Right now, she had more important things to focus on. She had seen something in Kennedy Clarence's eyes in those final moments, a spark of hope he couldn't quite suppress. He would look into her research. His survival instinct would demand it, And when he did, he would find the truth she had discovered buried in medical journals and case studies. His condition had more to do with his mind than his body. As she hailed a cab, Billy allowed herself to recall the moment their eyes had first met. Behind the fear and anger, she had seen something else in those grey depths, something lonely and wounded that called to the healer in her. Kennedy Clarence might be a billionaire who could buy and sell her company 100 times over, but in that moment she had seen him for what he really was. A man trapped in a prison of his own making, waiting for someone brave enough to break down his walls. She had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in New York. But as her grandmother always said, sometimes the biggest risks brought the greatest rewards. And something told her that Kennedy Clarence was worth the risk. Chapter 3. The First Encounter. Kennedy Clarence's private elevator hummed as it descended to the medical suite on the 58th floor. His hands, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar contracts without hesitation, trembled slightly as he loosened his tie further. The encounter with Billy Coco had shaken him more deeply than he cared to admit. Dr. Marcus Rivera was already waiting when the elevator doors opened, his familiar presence an anchor in Kennedy's turbulent thoughts. The medical suite, a necessity in a building housing a CEO who could go into anaphylactic shock at any moment, gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment and the sterile precision of a high-end clinic. "Sit," Marcus commanded, already preparing to take Kennedy's vitals. "James called me the moment she breached the floor. I was expecting to find you unconscious." Kennedy sank into the examination chair, his mind replaying the confrontation in vivid detail. "So was I." Marcus's hands stilled on the blood pressure cuff. "What do you mean?" "I stayed conscious." Kennedy's voice held a note of wonder he couldn't quite suppress. Breathing was difficult, yes. The usual symptoms started: tightness in the chest, burning sensation under the skin. But it was different, manageable. "That's impossible." Marcus reached for Kennedy's wrist, counting his pulse. "In 20 years, you've never been able to remain functional in close proximity to a woman. The longest you've managed is 90 seconds, and that was with enough antihistamines in your system to knock out a horse." Kennedy closed his eyes, seeing again the fierce determination in Billy's face as she'd confronted him. "She said something about her research, about my condition not being what we think it is." Marcus's silence spoke volumes. When Kennedy opened his eyes, he found his oldest friend wearing an expression he hadn't seen since they were teenagers, trying to understand why Kennedy's body had suddenly turned against him. "What aren't you telling me?" Marcus sighed, pulling up a chair. "I've been following Dr. Coco's research for months. Her work on autoimmune responses and psychosomatic triggers, it's revolutionary. When I saw the patent application from our pharmaceutical division, I knew they were trying to acquire it by any means necessary." "You knew?" Kennedy's voice dropped to a dangerous register. "You knew they were planning to steal her work?" "I knew they were interested in it. I didn't know they'd go this far." Marcus ran a hand through his greying hair. "Ken, her research could explain why traditional treatments have never worked for you. She's discovered a connection between childhood trauma and the body's autoimmune responses that could stop." Kennedy stood abruptly, ignoring the way the room swayed slightly. "I'm not going down this road again. No more theories, no more treatments, no more hope." Marcus's quiet words hit like a slap. "You just experienced something unprecedented. For the first time in 20 years, you maintained consciousness and cognitive function in a woman's presence. Doesn't that make you wonder?" Kennedy turned to stare out the window, his reflection ghostly against the Manhattan skyline. The truth was, he hadn't stopped wondering since Billy Coco had burst into his office. It wasn't just that he'd remained conscious. It was the way his symptoms had seemed to respond to his will for the first time ever, as if something in her presence had awakened a part of him that had been dormant for decades. "Have you read her research?" he asked finally. "Everything I could access." Marcus moved to stand beside him. "She's brilliant, Ken. Her understanding of the connection between psychological trauma and physical symptoms, it's like nothing I've ever seen. And the success rates in her clinical trials." "Send me everything." Kennedy's decision crystallized as he spoke. "And get me the complete file on that patent application. I want to know exactly what our people were planning." Marcus's reflection smiled. "Already done. It's waiting in your secure server." Kennedy turned to face his friend, seeing the hope he tried so hard to suppress mirrored in Marcus's eyes. "This doesn't mean I'm starting treatment again. I just want to understand what she thinks she knows about my condition." "Of course," Marcus's tone was carefully neutral. "Although you might want to hurry. If she goes public with the patent theft attempt, she won't." Kennedy's certainty surprised them both. She could have called the press before coming here, could have turned this into a public relations nightmare. Instead, she came directly to me. "Because she's more interested in helping you than hurting the company," Marcus concluded. Interesting woman. Kennedy's mind flashed to the way Billy had stood her ground, fierce and brilliant and utterly unafraid. Interesting is one word for it. Back in his office, Kennedy found himself unable to focus on anything except the secure folder Marcus had sent. His usual afternoon meetings had been cancelled, standard protocol after any incident, leaving him alone with the mysteries Billy Coco had brought into his carefully ordered world. The research documents painted a picture that both fascinated and disturbed him. Billy's work focused on cases where severe emotional trauma had triggered physical symptoms that persisted long after the original trauma had passed. Her breakthrough lay in understanding how the mind could essentially reprogram the body's immune system, creating genuine physical responses to psychological triggers. One case study in particular caught his attention: a young boy who had developed severe allergic reactions to dogs after witnessing his beloved pet die in a traumatic accident. Traditional allergy treatments had failed, but Billy's approach, combining psychological intervention with targeted immune therapy, had gradually allowed him to be around dogs again. Kennedy's hands tightened on his desk as memories he'd long suppressed tried to surface. His mother's final days, the helplessness he'd felt watching her slip away, the way his world had shattered when she finally left him. The first allergic reaction had come just weeks after her funeral, during a hug from his aunt. Then another, with his female tutor. Then another and another until his body had turned every female presence into a threat. The intercom buzzed, startling him from his thoughts. "Mr. Clarence," James's voice carried a note of concern. "Dr. Coco is in the lobby again. She's requesting another meeting." Kennedy's pulse quickened, but the usual panic didn't follow. Instead, he felt something else, a strange mix of fear and fascination that made his next words feel like stepping off a cliff. "Send her up." "Sir," James's shock was evident. "Are you sure that's—" "Have security escort her, and James, make sure Marcus is standing by." The minutes between his decision and Billy's arrival seemed to stretch endlessly. Kennedy used them to prepare himself, focusing on the breathing exercises that sometimes help control his symptoms. He moved to stand by the windows, his preferred position for difficult conversations, where the vast cityscape below reminded him of everything he'd built despite his limitations. The door opened, and there she was again. Billy Coco walked into his office like she owned it, her confidence both irritating and oddly compelling. She had changed since the morning, trading her formal suit for a deep purple dress that somehow managed to be both professional and striking. Kennedy felt the familiar tightness in his chest begin, but like before it seemed muted, present but not overwhelming. "You read my research," she said without preamble. It wasn't a question. "You knew I would." His voice came out steadier than he expected. "That's why you came here instead of going to the press." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I had a feeling you were the type to do your homework." She moved further into the office, watching his reactions carefully. "Your symptoms are already different, aren't they? Less severe than usual." Kennedy fought the urge to back away as she approached. "Why are you here, doctor?" "Coco, really?" "Because I can help you." She stopped several feet away, respecting his space while maintaining eye contact. "And because helping you might be the key to helping thousands of others suffering from similar conditions." "Similar conditions?" He almost laughed. "There are no similar conditions. Trust me, we've looked." "That's because you've been looking in the wrong places." Billy took another step forward and Kennedy forced himself to stand his ground. "Your doctors have been treating this like a purely physical condition. But what if it's not? What if your body's reaction to female presence is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism triggered by psychological trauma?" "You think you can psychoanalyze me based on some medical records and research papers?" The words came out harsh, but Billy didn't flinch. "I think I can help you understand why you're still standing right now, having a conversation with a woman, when by all accounts you should be unconscious on the floor." Her eyes held his, challenging and compassionate at once. "I think you want to understand it too." Kennedy moved to his desk, kneading the solid wooden barrier between them. "And what do you want in return? Besides stopping the patent acquisition?" "Partnership." Billy's answer was immediate. "Your resources and my research, working together instead of against each other. Think about it. If we can understand and treat your condition, we could help countless others suffering from psychosomatic immune responses." "You make it sound simple." "It won't be." She leaned forward, placing her hands on his desk, and Kennedy found himself mesmerized by the way her presence seemed to fill the room without overwhelming it. "It will be difficult, probably painful, and success isn't guaranteed. But you've already proven today that change is possible. The question is, are you brave enough to try?" Their eyes met across the desk, and Kennedy felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of something deeper than business proposals and medical theories. In Billy's gaze, he saw not just determination and intelligence, but a genuine desire to help that reminded him painfully of his mother. "I'll need time to consider your proposal," he said finally, surprised by how normal his voice sounded despite their proximity. Billy straightened, reaching into her bag to pull out a business card. She placed it on his desk with deliberate care. "Take all the time you need, but remember, every day you wait is another day lived in fear of something you might not need to fear at all." She turned to leave, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Oh, and Mr. Clarence, I expect your pharmaceutical division to withdraw their patent application by tomorrow morning. Consider it a show of good faith." After she left, Kennedy remained at his desk for a long time, staring at the business card she'd left behind. His symptoms had already begun to fade, leaving him with a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. Picking up his phone, he dialed a familiar number. "Marcus? Clear my schedule for the next hour? We need to talk about Dr. Coco's research." As he hung up, Kennedy caught his reflection in the window. For the first time in 20 years, he saw something in his own eyes that he'd thought long dead. Hope. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility, as Kennedy Clarence began to consider that perhaps, just perhaps, His curse wasn't as unbreakable as he'd believed. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded surprisingly like Billy's whispered that some risks were worth taking, even if they meant letting your walls come crumbling down. Chapter 4. Dangerous Curiosity. The late-night silence of Kennedy's penthouse was broken only by the soft glow of his laptop and the gentle hum of Manhattan's 60 floors below. Sleep had become elusive since Billy Coco had stormed into his life a week ago, turning his carefully ordered world upside down. Instead of rest, he found himself obsessively reading through her research papers, searching for answers to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. The coffee beside him had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the screen, where Billy's latest published paper laid out a revolutionary approach to treating autoimmune disorders. Her writing was like her presence, direct, passionate, and impossible to ignore. The connection between psychological trauma and physical manifestations remains poorly understood, he read aloud, her words echoing in the empty space. In cases where traditional medical interventions have failed, we must consider the possibility that the body's immune response is acting on deeper programming than mere cellular recognition. Kennedy ran a hand through his disheveled hair, thinking of how his own body had reacted differently in Billy's presence. The usual violent rejection had been there, yes, but somehow muted, as if her very certainty that she could help him had somehow influenced his symptoms. His phone buzzed, displaying Marcus's name. Few people had permission to contact him at this hour, but his oldest friend had always been an exception. "It's 3 in the morning," Kennedy answered, knowing why Marcus was calling. "And you're still up reading her research, aren't you?" Marcus's voice held a mixture of concern and amusement. "I know you, Ken. You haven't been able to think about anything else all week." Kennedy's eyes drifted to the other papers spread across his desk, medical journals, case studies, and most intriguingly, the complete history of Billy's work at Cocotech Biologics. "She's brilliant," he admitted quietly. "Her understanding of the mind-body connection, it's unlike anything we've seen before." "I know." Marcus paused. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The window beckoned, and Kennedy found himself standing before it, looking out at the city he'd built his empire in. From this height, the streets below looked like rivers of light, flowing endlessly through concrete canyons. Somewhere out there, Billy Coco was probably still awake too, working on research that could change countless lives. "I had James look into her background," Kennedy said finally. "Did you know she built Cocotech from nothing? Started in her garage with settlement money from her grandmother's wrongful death suit. Now she's on the verge of a breakthrough that could revolutionize autoimmune treatment." "And you're avoiding my question," Marcus observed. "Ken, I've watched you suffer with this condition for 20 years. We've tried every treatment, consulted every specialist, but I've never seen you respond to anyone the way you respond to her." Kennedy's reflection stared back at him, grey eyes troubled in the darkened glass. "It's dangerous, Marcus. If I let myself believe there's a cure, if I let myself hope, maybe hope is exactly what you need." Marcus's voice softened. "You can't keep living like this, building higher walls, isolating yourself from any chance at a real life." "I have a life," Kennedy protested. "Clarence Industries is a prison you've built around yourself?" Marcus cut in. "A company isn't a life, Ken. And we both know your condition has been getting worse. The preventive medications aren't working like they used to. Eventually, even your current limited contact with the world won't be sustainable." The truth of those words hit Kennedy like a physical blow. He'd noticed it himself. The increasing severity of his reactions, the way even brief, distant encounters with women were becoming harder to manage, except with Billy. His eyes fell on the business card she'd left, still sitting on his desk where he'd placed it a week ago. He'd memorized the number but hadn't called, telling himself he needed more time to research, to think, to prepare. The truth was, he was terrified. Not of treatment failing again, but of it succeeding. Of what that might mean for everything he'd built his life around. "I had another dream about Mom last night," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. She was in her garden, like before she got sick. But this time, when I tried to reach her, I could. No reaction, no symptoms. Just peace. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You think it means something?" "I think—" Kennedy picked up Billy's card, running his thumb over the embossed letters. "I think I'm tired of being afraid." "Then call her," Marcus said simply. "What's the worst that could happen?" Kennedy almost laughed. "I could go into anaphylactic shock and die?" "You haven't so far. Not with her." Marcus's tone turned serious. "Ken, in all the years I've known you, I've never seen you back down from a challenge. You built an empire while fighting a condition that should have made it impossible. You've never let fear stop you from achieving your goals. So why are you really hesitating?" The question hung in the air as Kennedy remembered the way Billy had looked at him. Not with pity or clinical detachment, but with understanding and something else he couldn't quite name. She had seen past his walls, past his defenses, to something he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it existed. "Because if she's right," he said slowly, "if this really is connected to psychological trauma, it means facing things I haven't let myself think about in 20 years. Your mother's death?" Kennedy closed his eyes, memories washing over him like waves. Everything. The helplessness of watching her slip away, the way the world seemed to collapse afterward. The first time my body rejected female contact, it was at her funeral, when my aunt tried to hug me. I've never told anyone that. "Maybe it's time to tell someone," Marcus suggested gently. "Someone who might actually be able to help you understand why it happened." Kennedy's phone buzzed again, an email notification. His breath caught when he saw the sender, Dr. Billy Coco. Subject, new research findings. Urgent. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. She was awake too. With slightly trembling fingers, he opened the email. "Mr. Clarence, I've been analyzing your medical history alongside my latest research data. There are patterns here that can't be ignored. I know you're still processing everything, but time might be more critical than we realized. I'll be in my lab all night if you want to discuss this in person. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen at 3 a.m. Billy P.S. I had my lab tested and certified allergen-free. Just in case." Kennedy found himself smiling, despite the gravity of the situation. Even in a simple email, her personality shone through, brilliant, direct, and somehow both professional and personal at once. "She just emailed me," he told Marcus. "She's working late at her lab." "Of course she is." Marcus chuckled. "Brilliant minds think alike. Are you going to go?" Kennedy looked down at himself, designer pajamas and bare feet, hardly his usual impeccable appearance. "It's the middle of the night. Since when has that ever stopped you from pursuing something important?" Important. The word echoed in Kennedy's mind as he thought about everything he'd read this week. Billy's research wasn't just about his condition. It was about understanding how trauma shaped the body's responses, how the mind could literally reprogram immune systems. If she was right, the implications went far beyond his personal struggles. "Her lab's been certified allergen-free," he said, almost to himself. "Sounds like she's thought of everything." Marcus's smile was audible. "She's as thorough as you are." Kennedy was already moving toward his bedroom, mind made up. "I'll call you tomorrow." "Good luck," Marcus said simply, and hung up. 20 minutes later, Kennedy stood in his private elevator, wearing one of his signature suits, his hair carefully styled despite the hour. Some habits were too ingrained to break, even at 3 a.m. His driver, used to odd hours and discretion, was already waiting in the garage with the Bentley. As they drove through the quietly humming city, Kennedy found his thoughts returning to the dream about his mother. In all the years since her death, he'd never been able to reach her in his dreams, his condition manifesting even in sleep to keep him apart. But last night had been different. The GPS directed them to an unassuming building in a developing area of the city, the kind of neighborhood where innovative startups could still afford lab space. Cocotec's logo glowed softly above the entrance, the only sign of life on the quiet street. Kennedy's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Door code is 1893. Take the elevator to B2. Follow the blue line on the floor. I'll be in the main lab. B. His heart rate picked up as he punched in the code. This was madness. Going to meet a woman alone in the middle of the night, walking willingly into a situation his body had been rejecting for 2 decades. Yet something deeper than logic drove him forward, following the blue line through sterile corridors that smelled of disinfectant and possibility. He heard her before he saw her, the sound of fingers typing rapidly on a keyboard, punctuated by occasional murmurs of frustration. Then he turned a corner, and there she was. Billie sat surrounded by multiple computer screens, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a lab coat over what looked like yoga pants and an oversized sweater. She looked nothing like the polished businesswoman who had stormed his office, but somehow this version of her was even more compelling, raw, real, and completely absorbed in her work. She didn't look up as he entered, though he knew she must have heard him. Your latest blood work from 6 months ago shows increasing levels of inflammatory markers, she said without preamble. The traditional immunosuppressants aren't just failing, they're potentially making things worse. Kennedy moved closer, forcing himself to breathe normally as his body registered her presence. The symptoms were there but distant, like thunder from a storm passing far away. How did you get my medical records? Now she did look up, and Kennedy felt that same jolt of connection he'd experienced in his office. You really want to debate medical privacy laws at 3 in the morning? Actually, he found himself saying, I want to understand why you're still working at 3 in the morning on a condition that isn't even officially your research focus. Billie's eyes softened slightly. Because I recognize that look in your eyes, the one that says you've accepted limitations that might not actually exist. I saw it in my grandmother's eyes before she died, when doctors told her nothing could be done. I see it in my research subjects' eyes before we help them break through their bodies' self-imposed barriers. She stood, moving around her desk to face him directly. And because I think helping you might be the key to helping thousands of others. Kennedy realized he hadn't backed away when she approached. His breathing remained steady, his pulse elevated but not racing. You really believe you can help me? I believe you've already started helping yourself, she said quietly. You're here, aren't you? Their eyes met in the soft lab lighting, and Kennedy felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared purpose that went beyond medical mysteries or business proposals. In that moment, he saw not just the brilliant researcher or the fierce businesswoman, but someone who understood what it meant to be driven by the need to solve impossible problems. Show me what you've found, he said finally, and watched as her face lit up with that passionate intensity he was coming to recognize. As the night deepened into early morning, they lost themselves in medical data and theoretical discussions, neither acknowledging the growing comfort in each other's presence or the way their hands occasionally brushed as they pointed out details on screens. And if Kennedy noticed how his symptoms seemed to fade further with each passing hour, he chose not to mention it. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs did happen at 3 a.m., not just in medicine, but in the human heart as well. Chapter 5. The hotel incident. The plaza. Hotel's gilded entrance gleamed in the late afternoon sun as Kennedy's Bentley pulled up to the curb. He adjusted his tie, a habit more nervous than necessary, and checked his phone one last time. The calendar invite from his executive team was clear. Strategic planning meeting, private dining room B, 4 p.m. Something feels off, he muttered to himself as the doorman approached. In the week since his late-night visit to Billy's lab, he'd thrown himself into his usual work routine, trying to ignore the way his thoughts kept drifting to dark eyes and brilliant theories. The hotel's lobby was a study in old-world luxury, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Kennedy moved through it with practiced ease, nodding to the discreet security personnel his team always arranged in advance. Yet something about their positioning seemed different today, more scattered, less protective. His private elevator required a key card, another standard security measure. But when the doors opened on the correct floor, Kennedy immediately sensed the carefully orchestrated deception. The air carried a hint of jasmine, Billy's perfume. He'd noticed it that night in her lab, when they'd worked side by side until dawn broke over the city. "Harrison!" Kennedy called sharply to his head of security, who was positioned by the private dining room doors. "What's going on?" The man had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Sir, the board felt that given the recent improvements in your condition..." Kennedy's pulse quickened as the pieces fell into place. "Who's in that room?" "Mr. Clarence." The voice behind him made him freeze. Olivia Chen, his board chair, emerged from a side door. "We've been watching the medical reports. Your reactions have been decreasing in severity, specifically around Dr. Coco. The board feels it's time to explore the possibilities this presents." His hands clenched into fists. "You arranged this?" "Without consulting me?" "Sometimes the best solutions require a gentle push," Olivia said smoothly. "Dr. Coco's research offers the first real hope we've seen in 20 years. The board has a responsibility to explore all options for ensuring the company's stable leadership." Before Kennedy could respond, the private dining room doors opened. The jasmine scent grew stronger, and he turned slowly, already knowing what he would find. Billy stood by the window, the late afternoon sun creating a halo around her silhouette. She wore a deep blue dress that seemed to capture the essence of twilight, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. But it was her expression that caught him, surprise mixed with something that looked like hurt. "You didn't arrange this?" she asked, taking a step forward. Kennedy backed toward the door, fighting the familiar tightening in his chest. But something was different this time. The panic felt sharper, more immediate, not because of her presence, but because of the manipulation. "No," he managed to say, "this was not my idea." Billy's eyes narrowed as she looked past him to Olivia. "You told me he requested this meeting, that he was ready to discuss expanding our research partnership." "The board felt that formal channels were moving too slowly," Olivia explained, her tone professional but unapologetic. "Given the potential benefits to both parties..." "Benefits?" Kennedy's voice cut through the room like ice. "You ambushed both of us, manipulated the situation, and violated every security protocol we have in place. Harrison, clear the floor, now." The security team moved with practiced efficiency, but Kennedy barely noticed. His focus had narrowed to Billy, who stood watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I should have known," she said quietly. "This isn't your style." "I would never..." He had to pause, fighting for breath as the symptoms intensified. The betrayal, the anger, the violation of his carefully maintained boundaries, it all fed into his body's reaction. "This isn't how I work." Billy moved toward him, concern replacing hurt in her eyes. "Kennedy, you're breathing..." "Don't." He held up a hand, backing away. "Please, I need to... I can't..." The walls seemed to be closing in. The jasmine scent that had been almost pleasant in her lab now felt overwhelming. Kennedy turned and fled, ignoring Olivia's calls and the startled looks from hotel guests as he bypassed the elevator for the emergency stairs. He made it down 2 flights before his legs gave out. Sinking onto the stairs, he fumbled for the EpiPen he always carried, but his hands were shaking too badly to manage it. "Let me help." Billy's voice came from above him, and he looked up to find her descending the stairs with careful steps. "Don't try to talk. Just focus on breathing." "You followed me?" The words came out strained. "Of course I did." She crouched beside him, maintaining a small distance. "I'm not about to let you go into anaphylactic shock in a hotel stairwell. Now where's your EpiPen?" "Inside pocket," he managed. "But you can't. The contact—" "Kennedy." Her voice was firm but gentle. "Look at me. Really look at me." He forced his eyes to meet hers, and something strange happened. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the stairwell, with his heart racing and his body rebelling, he saw past the physical threat his mind had assigned to her. He saw the intelligence behind her eyes, the genuine concern in her expression, the steady calm she radiated even in crisis. "Your symptoms are escalating because you feel trapped and betrayed," she said quietly. "Your body is responding to psychological stress more than physical proximity. Remember what happened in my lab? When you chose to be there, when you had control over the situation, your reactions were minimal." She was right, he realized. That night in her lab, working side by side for hours, he'd experienced only mild symptoms. Even their subsequent meetings in his office, when he'd been prepared and in control, had been manageable. "The board," he started. "Can go to hell," Billy finished, earning a surprised look. "Sorry, but what they did was unethical and potentially dangerous. They risked your health for their agenda, and they manipulated both of us. I don't work with people who operate that way." Despite everything, Kennedy felt his breathing begin to steady. "That's very refreshing to hear." "Yeah, well," she smiled slightly. "I meant what I said about wanting to help you, but it has to be on your terms. Trust and consent are crucial for treating conditions with psychological components." Kennedy looked down at his hands, noticing they had stopped shaking. The symptoms, they're subsiding. "Because you're regaining control of the situation," Billy explained. "Your body's learning that female presence itself isn't the threat. It's the loss of control, the feeling of being trapped or manipulated. That's consistent with what I've observed in your medical history and my research data." She shifted slightly, and Kennedy tensed, but the violent reaction he expected didn't come. Instead, he found himself studying the way the emergency lighting caught the gold undertones in her skin, the determined set of her jaw, the grace with which she balanced on the stairs beside him. "How did you know I'd come this way?" he asked suddenly. "Because I read people well. It's part of my job." She smiled that fierce smile he was coming to know. "The elevator would have felt too confined, too controlled by others. You needed space and air. The stairs were the logical choice." Kennedy felt something shift inside him, a recognition that went beyond medical interest or professional respect. This woman didn't just understand his condition, she understood him. "I should have called you," he admitted. "After that night in your lab, I've been processing." "I know." Her voice softened. "It's a lot to take in. The possibility that everything you thought you knew about your condition might need to be re-evaluated. That kind of paradigm shift takes time." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of hotel activity filtering through the stairwell doors. Kennedy realized he was sitting in a public stairwell with a woman, something that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "What happens now?" he asked finally. Billy stood, smoothing her dress with graceful hands. "Now, you go deal with your board. because they need to understand that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And when you're ready, really ready, you know where to find me. She turned to climb the stairs, but paused after a few steps. Oh, and Kennedy? Next time you want to have dinner with me, just ask. No need for elaborate setups or corporate conspiracies. He found himself smiling despite everything. Is that an invitation, Doctor? Coco. That depends. She looked back over her shoulder, and Kennedy's breath caught at the mix of challenge and warmth in her eyes. Are you brave enough to accept it? As she disappeared up the stairs, Kennedy remained seated for a moment longer, analyzing his body's responses. The symptoms had almost completely subsided, leaving him with a different kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with allergies and everything to do with the way Billy Coco seemed to see right through his carefully constructed walls. Finally, he stood and straightened his tie. He had a board to confront, protocols to reinforce, and most importantly, a dinner invitation to consider. For the first time in 20 years, the prospect of sharing a meal with a woman didn't fill him with dread. It filled him with something that felt dangerously like hope. The plaza's stairwell had witnessed many things in its long history, but perhaps never a moment quite like this. A man learning that sometimes the first step toward healing was admitting that the walls you'd built to protect yourself might be the very things keeping you from truly living. As Kennedy climbed the stairs back to the hotel's main level, he pulled out his phone and opened a new message to Billy. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before typing, "About that dinner invitation. How does tomorrow night sound? My terms, my choice of venue. No boards, no setups, no agenda except conversation." Her reply came almost immediately. "Now that sounds like the Kennedy Clarence I'm getting to know. Tomorrow it is. Try not to run away this time." Kennedy found himself chuckling as he stepped into the lobby. The afternoon sun caught the crystal chandeliers, sending rainbows dancing across the marble floors, and for once he allowed himself to imagine a future where light and hope could outshine the shadows of his past. Chapter 6. Breaking Points. The underground parking garage of Clarence Tower echoed with the sharp click of Billy's heels as she strode past the security checkpoint. It had been 3 days since the hotel incident, 3 days since Kennedy had sent that dinner invitation, and then nothing. No calls, no messages, just silence and cancelled appointments. "Mr. Clarence isn't available," his assistant had said again and again. But Billy had seen the research data, had monitored the spike in his inflammatory markers after the hotel confrontation. She knew what total withdrawal could mean for his condition. "You can't avoid me forever." Her voice bounced off concrete walls as she spotted him heading toward his car. "Your condition is changing. You know it is." Kennedy spun around, his normally perfect composure cracking. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, she could see the toll the past few days had taken. The shadows under his eyes, the slight tremor in his usually steady hands. "You think you understand?" His voice echoed through the garage, raw with emotion. 20 years of specialists, treatments, failures. I've accepted what I am." "No." Billy stepped closer, making him back against his car. "You've hidden. There's a difference." The garage felt too small, too intimate. The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with his condition and everything to do with the way they'd connected in that hotel stairwell. "Stay away from me, Ms. Coco." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Please." The please surprised them both, vulnerable, almost desperate. Billy took another step forward, close enough now to see the internal battle raging behind his grey eyes. "Your latest blood work shows critical inflammation levels," she said quietly. "You're not just hiding from me, Kennedy. You're hiding from the truth. The hotel incident triggered something, a breakthrough or a breakdown, but you can't just ignore it." "A breakthrough?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what you call having a panic attack in a public stairwell? I call it proof that your condition responds to emotional states more than physical proximity. Billy stood her ground, even as she saw his breathing quicken. In the lab that night, when you felt safe and in control, your symptoms were minimal. In the hotel, when you felt trapped and betrayed, they spiked. Don't you see what that means? Kennedy's hands gripped the edge of his car door, knuckles white with tension. It means nothing. It's just another theory, another false hope. I've been down this road before. No, you haven't. Billy's voice softened, but her words carried steel. Because no one before understood what was really happening to you. Your body isn't rejecting women. It's protecting you from perceived emotional threats. The question is, what were you protecting yourself from 20 years ago? The question hit him like a physical blow. Billy watched as something dark and painful flickered across his face, quickly masked but unmistakable. Don't, he warned, but his voice shook slightly. Your mother died, she pressed on, knowing she was walking a dangerous line. And weeks later, your body suddenly developed this condition. That's not coincidence, Kennedy. That's trauma response on a cellular level. Stop! He pushed off from the car, looming over her with the full force of his presence. You don't get to analyze me. You don't get to dig into my past and pretend you know what it feels like to lose someone. Billy cut him off, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. To watch them slip away while doctors shake their heads and say nothing can be done. I watched my grandmother die because medical science failed her. That's why I do what I do. That's why I know I can help you, because I understand what it means to build walls around your heart after loss. The space between them seemed to compress, charged with something that went beyond professional interest or scientific curiosity. Kennedy's breathing had grown ragged, but he hadn't backed away despite their proximity. 3 days. She continued softly. You've spent 3 days hiding in your tower, letting your condition worsen because what happened in that stairwell scared you. Not the symptoms. They were manageable. What scared you was feeling something else, wasn't it? Billy. Her name came out like a prayer or a warning. She couldn't tell which. Please. I can't. Can't what? She took one final step closer. Close enough to see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. Can't face the possibility that your condition might be healable. Can't accept that maybe, just maybe, you've been using it as a shield to avoid connecting with anyone who might make you feel something real. The garage's ventilation system hummed overhead, a mechanical counterpoint to their ragged breathing. Kennedy's eyes hadn't left hers, and in them she saw a war being waged between decades of fear and something new, something dangerous and electric. You don't understand what you're risking, he said finally, his voice rough. If you're wrong, if this makes things worse, then we'll face it together. Billy reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and placed her hand over his where it gripped the car door. But I'm not wrong. Your body is already proving it. Look at us right now. A week ago, this much contact would have sent you into shock. Something's changing, Kennedy. The question is, are you brave enough to find out what? He stared at their hands, and Billy felt the slight tremor that ran through him. But he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers shifted almost imperceptibly, adjusting to accommodate her touch. The dinner invitation, he said suddenly. I didn't cancel it because I was hiding. I cancelled it because I spent 2 hours that morning in the medical suite, going over contingency plans with Marcus, testing different medications, arranging emergency protocols. I needed it to be safe. The admission hit Billy like a wave of warmth. Even in his withdrawal, he'd been thinking of her safety, of making sure his condition wouldn't put her at risk. Kennedy. She waited until he met her eyes again. Has it occurred to you that maybe I'm not the one who needs protecting?" A sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh escaped him. "Is that your professional opinion, Doctor?" "Coco?" "No." She smiled slightly, feeling some of the tension ease between them. "That's my very personal observation of a man who's spent so long building walls that he's forgotten what it feels like to let someone see over them." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shifting shadows across Kennedy's face as he studied her. Something in his expression had changed, softened perhaps, or opened. "You're the most dangerous person I've ever met," he said finally, "because I make you question everything you thought you knew about your condition. Because you make me want to believe you." The words came out barely above a whisper. "And hope is a dangerous thing when you've lived without it for so long." Billy felt the weight of that admission, the trust it represented, the fear it revealed. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she turned her hand under his until their palms met. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the most dangerous thing we can do is admit that we're tired of being afraid." Kennedy's fingers curled around hers, tentative but deliberate. The contact sent a shiver through both of them that had nothing to do with medical conditions and everything to do with boundaries being carefully, consciously crossed. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly. "Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight, before I can overthink it or let fear take control again." "Your terms?" she asked, remembering their earlier agreement. "My terms." He nodded, some of his usual confidence returning to his voice. "But this time, I understand what those terms really mean. No hiding behind medical precautions or security protocols. Just this, whatever this is becoming." The parking garage's harsh lighting softened somehow, or perhaps it was just the way Kennedy was looking at her, like she was simultaneously the most frightening and most fascinating thing he'd ever encountered. "Pick me up at 8, she said simply. "And Kennedy, bring yourself, not your walls. I think we've both had enough of those." As she turned to leave, her heels clicking against concrete in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, Billy felt his eyes following her. She had pushed hard today, forced confrontations he might not have been ready for. But sometimes breakthrough moments required a little pushing, a little faith, and a lot of courage. Behind her she heard the soft thud of a car door closing, followed by the purr of an engine starting. But it was what she didn't hear that mattered most. No gasping breaths, no medical emergencies, no panic attacks. Just the sound of a man choosing finally to face his fears instead of running from them. The parking garage had witnessed their confrontation, but more importantly, it had witnessed something else. The moment when walls built over 20 years began to show their first real cracks, letting in the possibility of something newer and braver and far more dangerous than fear, hope. Chapter 7. Walls Crumbling. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning Manhattan's elegant evening streets into wind-swept chaos. Lightning split the sky as Kennedy's private elevator descended to Clarence Tower's lobby, his mind still processing the latest batch of medical results Marcus had just shown him. His blood work was changing, cellular markers shifting in ways that defied traditional medical understanding. The lobby's soaring windows offered a dramatic view of the storm, rain lashing against glass in sheets, while thunder rattled the building's foundations. As lightning flashed again, he caught sight of a familiar figure huddled just inside the entrance. Billy, her usual confident posture somewhat dampened by her drenched appearance. "Your security won't let me up," she explained when she saw him, water dripping from her curls onto the marble floor. "But I've found something in your blood work. Something everyone else missed." Kennedy should have called security, should have maintained the careful distance they'd established since their dinner a week ago, a dinner that had lasted 5 hours and ended with both of them realizing how dangerous their growing connection could be. Instead, he found himself reaching for his elevator key card. "Come up to the penthouse," he said, surprising them both. "You can't work in this condition." Billy's eyes widened slightly, but she followed him into the elevator without comment. As the doors closed, Kennedy felt the familiar tightening in his chest. But it was different now, mixed with something else that made his pulse quicken for entirely new reasons. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of Clarence Tower, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the storm-swept city. Lightning illuminated the space in stark flashes, thunder following close behind. "You should change," Kennedy said, heading for his bedroom. "I'll find you something dry." When he returned with a soft cashmere sweater and drawstring pants, he found Billy standing by the windows silhouetted against the stormy sky. She had removed her wet jacket, but her silk blouse clung to her curves in a way that made Kennedy's breath catch. "Here," he managed, holding out the clothes. "The bathroom's through there." She took the bundle with a small smile. "Always prepared, aren't you?" "I like to maintain control of situations. I've noticed." Her eyes met his, holding something knowing and challenging. "But control isn't always the answer, is it?" Before he could respond, she disappeared into the bathroom. Kennedy moved to the kitchen, needing distance and something to do with his hands. He was setting up his coffee maker when thunder cracked directly overhead, plunging the penthouse into darkness. "Kennedy?" Billy's voice came from the bathroom, uncertain for the first time since he'd known her. "Emergency lights should kick in," he called back, already reaching for his phone's flashlight. "Give it a minute." The backup system hummed to life, bathing the penthouse in soft amber light. Billy emerged from the bathroom wearing his clothes, her wet hair curling wildly around her face, and Kennedy felt something shift inside him. A recognition that this moment was somehow more intimate than any of their careful medical discussions or charged confrontations. "You said you found something in my blood work," he said, focusing on the familiar territory of his condition. "Yes." She moved to where she'd left her tablet, now recovered from her wet bag. "Look at these markers. The inflammation patterns aren't random, they're cyclical, responding to emotional triggers more than physical proximity." Kennedy leaned over her shoulder to see the screen, acutely aware of her scent, rain and jasmine, and something uniquely Billy. The data streams showed patterns he'd never noticed before, peaks and valleys that corresponded with specific events in his life. "This spike," she pointed, "was the day your board announced potential merger talks. And this one, the hotel incident. But look here, in your lab that night when we were working together. The levels dropped to nearly normal ranges." "Because I felt safe," he realized aloud. "In control." "No." Billy turned to face him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "Because you felt understood. There's a difference." Lightning flashed again, throwing their shadows against the far wall, two figures standing so close they almost merged into one. Kennedy should have backed away, should have maintained the professional distance that had protected him for so long. Instead, he found himself reaching out to brush a damp curl from her cheek. "What are you doing to me?" he whispered. Billy didn't pull away from his touch. "I'm not doing anything. You're the one choosing to lower your walls. It's dangerous," but he didn't move his hand. "Life is dangerous." She leaned slightly into his touch. "The question is, what are we more afraid of? The risk of pain or the certainty of regret?" Thunder rumbled again, but it felt distant now, background noise to the sound of their breathing and the electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. Kennedy's symptoms were present but muted, overwhelmed by other sensations, the softness of her skin under his fingers, the way her pulse jumped at his touch, the heat building between them. "The medical data," he started, but Billy placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. "Can wait," she finished. "Right now, I want you to notice something. You're touching me, voluntarily, without panic or preparation or medical supervision. Your body isn't rejecting me. It's responding to me. There's a world of difference between those two things. She was right. His heart was racing not from fear, but from desire. His breathing was quick, but steady. His hand had moved from her cheek to the curve of her neck, fingers tangling in damp curls. "This changes everything," he said softly, "only if you let it." Billy's hands came to rest lightly on his chest, and Kennedy felt the touch like fire through his shirt. "Your condition was never about rejecting women. It was about protecting yourself from emotional connection after losing your mother. But protection becomes prison if we let it define us forever." The storm raged outside, but in the amber emergency lighting of his penthouse, Kennedy felt something inside him finally break free. Years of fear and isolation crumbled like walls in an earthquake, leaving him exposed but somehow stronger. "Stay," he found himself saying, "not for medical research or blood work analysis, just stay. Let me order dinner. Let me try to understand what's happening between us without hiding behind medical terms or corporate walls." Billy's smile was soft but radiant. "Now that sounds like a breakthrough, Mr. Clarence." "Kennedy," he corrected, letting his forehead rest against hers. "I think we're well past formalities." They ordered Thai food from his favorite place, spreading medical files and research papers across his coffee table as they ate. But somewhere between analyzing data points and sharing stories about their pasts, the professional pretense fell away completely. Kennedy found himself telling her about his mother's garden, about summer afternoons, watching her tend roses and dreaming of future blooms. Billy shared stories of her grandmother's determination to see her succeed in medicine, even as cancer slowly took her away. "She would have liked you," Billy said softly, curled on his couch with a glass of wine. "My grandmother. She always said the strongest people were the ones brave enough to keep their hearts open after loss." "I haven't been very brave," Kennedy admitted, watching the storm through his windows. "I built all this, the company, the tower, the protocols, to avoid ever having to risk feeling that kind of pain again." "But you're being brave now." She moved closer until her head rested against his shoulder. The contact sent warmth spreading through him instead of panic. "That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching lightning paint the sky in brilliant strokes. Kennedy's arm had found its way around her shoulders, his body finally understanding that touch could heal as well as hurt. "I should go," Billy said eventually, though she made no move to leave. "It's late, and we both have early meetings tomorrow." "It's still storming." Kennedy tightened his arm slightly. "Stay. The guest room is made up and your clothes won't be dry until morning anyway." She tilted her head to look at him, searching his face for signs of distress or uncertainty. Finding none, she smiled that fierce smile he'd come to cherish. "Are you sure? No medical supervision, no emergency protocols?" "Just us," he said simply, "finding out what happens when walls come down." The storm raged through the night, but in Kennedy's penthouse something else was building, something stronger than fear, more powerful than habit, and infinitely more dangerous than any medical condition. As he lay in his bed, listening to the thunder and knowing Billy was just down the hall, Kennedy realized that some risks were worth taking, some battles worth losing, if surrender meant finally finding your way home. The medical files lay forgotten on the coffee table, but they had served their purpose. Sometimes, the greatest breakthroughs happened not in labs or research facilities, but in the quiet moments when two hearts recognized something in each other that went beyond science, something that felt surprisingly like healing and dangerously like love. Chapter 8. Touch morning light streamed through the windows of Kennedy's private medical suite, casting long shadows across the array of medical equipment that had defined his life for 2 decades. He sat in his usual examination chair, but something was different today. The familiar tension that usually accompanied these sessions was absent, replaced by a quiet determination. "Your latest blood work is remarkable," Marcus said, studying the results with barely contained excitement. "The inflammatory markers have decreased by 60% in the past month. I've never seen anything like it." Kennedy nodded, his mind drifting to the night of the storm, to Billy curled against him on his couch. "It's not just the numbers, the symptoms. They're changing. Sometimes they're barely there at all." "Since when?" Marcus looked up sharply. "And with whom?" "You know with whom." Kennedy stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city he'd built his empire in. "Billy thinks she's figured it out. The true nature of my condition." Marcus set down the medical charts, giving his friend his full attention. "Tell me." "Your condition isn't physical," Kennedy quoted from memory, hearing Billy's voice in his head. "It's psychosomatic, triggered by childhood trauma. Your body created physical symptoms to protect you." "Impossible," he whispered, but the word lacked conviction. Deep down, he'd always wondered about the timing. How his symptoms had first appeared in the weeks after his mother's death, how they'd worsened with each passing year as he built higher walls around his heart. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. The timing would fit, and the way your symptoms respond differently to her, it makes a kind of sense I've never considered before. The door opened and Billy walked in, her presence immediately filling the room with an energy that made Kennedy's pulse quicken. Not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous. "Sorry I'm late," she said, setting her research tablet on the examination table. "Traffic was impossible. Did you show him the new results?" "Just finished," Marcus replied, watching with professional interest as Kennedy moved closer to Billy without any sign of his usual symptoms. "I have to admit, your theory is becoming more compelling by the day." Billy's eyes met Kennedy's, holding that mix of challenge and compassion that never failed to unsettle him. "Are you ready to try something new?" He knew what she was asking. They'd discussed it the night before over dinner in his penthouse. Another evening that had stretched into the early hours as they talked about everything except the growing tension between them. "The touch therapy?" Marcus asked, eyebrows rising. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Nothing about this is wise," Kennedy said softly, still holding Billy's gaze. "But we have to know." Billy moved to stand before him, close enough that he could smell her familiar jasmine scent. "Your condition isn't physical," she explained again, her voice gentle but firm. "It's your body's way of protecting you from emotional pain after your mother's death. Every time you get close to forming a connection with a woman, your immune system creates physical symptoms to push them away before they can hurt you." "Like an emotional autoimmune response," Marcus mused, "the body attacking itself to prevent perceived threat." "Exactly." Billy reached for Kennedy's hand, moving slowly enough that he could pull away. "But you're not that frightened teenager anymore. You get to choose whether to keep those walls up." Kennedy looked down at their almost touching hands, feeling the familiar tightening in his chest, war with something stronger, something that felt like hope. "The medical monitoring equipment is ready," Marcus said quietly. "We'll be able to track every response." But Kennedy barely heard him. His world had narrowed to the small space between his hand and Billy's, to the choice that lay in that gap. 20 years of fear and isolation balanced against the possibility of something he'd thought forever lost to him. "Trust me," Billy whispered, and in her eyes he saw not just the brilliant researcher or the fierce businesswoman, but someone who understood loss and healing in ways that went beyond medical science. Slowly, fighting against 2 decades of conditioned response, Kennedy reached out and took her hand. The contact was electric, warm skin against warm skin, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that belied the magnitude of the moment. Kennedy waited for the panic to set in, for his throat to close and his body to reject the touch as it had so many times before. Instead, he felt something else entirely, a warmth that spread from their joined hands up his arm and through his chest, melting the ice that had frozen around his heart for so long. "Breathe," Billy reminded him softly. "Stay with me." He did, drawing in slow, steady breaths as his body processed this new reality. The monitors beeped steadily in the background, but their rhythm was normal, calm. "This is extraordinary," Marcus murmured, checking the readings. No elevation in stress markers, no immune response, barely even an increase in heart rate. "Because it's not about the physical contact," Billy explained, her thumb drawing small circles on Kennedy's palm that sent shivers of pleasure rather than panic through him. "It's about choosing to let someone in, to risk connection, even knowing it might lead to pain." Kennedy stared at their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt. "All these years," he said quietly, "all the treatments and specialists and medications, and the answer was this simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy," Billy corrected gently. "What you're doing right now, choosing to trust, to feel, to connect, it's one of the bravest things I've ever seen." He looked up then, meeting her eyes, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with medical breakthroughs or scientific understanding. In that moment, Kennedy saw his future unfolding in possibilities rather than limitations. Slowly, giving him time to process each new sensation, Billy stepped closer. Their joined hands pressed between them as she reached up with her free hand to touch his face. Kennedy's breath caught, but not from fear. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You're choosing to live instead of just survive." The mention of his mother should have triggered his symptoms. It always had before. Instead, Kennedy felt tears prick at his eyes as memories washed over him. His mother's garden, her gentle hands guiding his as they planted seeds together, her voice telling him that love was always worth the risk. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, you do." Billy smiled, that fierce smile he'd come to love. "You're just out of practice." Without conscious thought, Kennedy's free hand rose to mirror hers, cupping her cheek with a touch that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Her skin was soft under his fingers, warm and alive and real. "The readings are completely normal," Marcus announced from his position by the monitors. "Whatever barriers existed before, they're coming down." But Kennedy barely heard him. His world had narrowed to this moment, to the feeling of Billy's hand in his, and the way she looked at him. Not as the broken man who couldn't bear a woman's touch, but as someone whole and healing and worthy of love. "What happens now?" he asked softly. "Now," Billy replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "We take it one moment at a time. No rushing, no pressure, just two people learning to trust in healing." The morning sun painted patterns across the medical suite's sterile surfaces, transforming the room that had witnessed so much of Kennedy's suffering into a space of possibility. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual energy, but in here, time seemed to slow around their joined hands and shared breaths. "I should warn you," Kennedy said, attempting humor to mask the depth of his emotion. "I'm terribly out of practice at normal human interaction." Billy's laugh was warm and real. "Good thing I'm not interested in normal." Her fingers traced patterns on his palm that sent sparks of pleasure up his arm. "Normal is overrated. I prefer extraordinary." Looking at their intertwined fingers, at the medical monitors showing perfectly normal readings, at the way sunlight caught the gold undertones in Billy's skin, Kennedy had to agree. Normal had never been an option for him. but perhaps extraordinary, with all its risks and rewards, was exactly what he'd been waiting for all along. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of 20 years of isolation finally ending. "Don't thank me yet," Billy replied with that challenging gleam in her eyes. "We're just getting started. The real work begins now, learning to live without walls, to feel without fear, to love without limits." Love. The word hung in the air between them, neither acknowledged nor denied. But as Kennedy stood in the morning light, holding the hand of a woman who had literally broken through his defenses, he realized that some walls were meant to fall, some risks were meant to be taken, and some hearts were meant to heal, not despite their scars, but because of them. Marcus quietly excused himself, leaving them alone with their intertwined hands and the promise of tomorrow. The medical suite had witnessed countless moments of Kennedy's suffering over the years, but now it held something different, the beginning of a story about healing, hope, and the kind of love that could break through even the strongest defenses. Chapter 9. The Dance. The annual Clarence Foundation Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dender into a glittering wonderland of lights and luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic patterns across ancient stone walls, while Manhattan's elite moved through the space in designer finery worth more than most people's homes. Kennedy stood in the private antechamber where he'd prepared for these events for the past 20 years, adjusting his bow tie with hands that weren't quite steady. This year was different. This year, for the first time, he wasn't planning a brief appearance from behind protective barriers. "The car just arrived," Marcus announced, entering with his medical bag, a precaution Kennedy had insisted on despite his progress. "Are you sure about this?" Before Kennedy could answer, the door opened again, and every thought in his head scattered like stars. Billy stood in the doorway, and for a moment Kennedy forgot to breathe for reasons that had nothing to do with his condition. She wore a gown of liquid gold that seemed to capture and reflect every light in the room, her dark skin glowing like burnished bronze. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style that emphasized the graceful line of her neck, and her eyes. Her eyes held a mixture of challenge and tenderness that made his heart race. "You look—" Kennedy started, then stopped, finding words inadequate. "So do you," she replied with a smile that lit up the room more than any chandelier could. She moved toward him with that natural grace that had first caught his attention, her heels clicking softly on marble floors. "The press is already speculating about your guest," Marcus reported, checking his phone. "Someone leaked that you're arriving with a woman. The theories are interesting. Let them speculate." Kennedy reached for Billy's hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt now. 3 months ago, he couldn't have imagined standing this close to a woman, let alone touching one voluntarily. "Are you ready for this? Are you?" She squeezed his hand gently. "This is a big step. Being seen together in public, dancing at your own gala. We can still do it the old way if you're not sure." Kennedy thought about the old way, arriving separately, speaking from behind barriers, leaving before the main events began. A life lived in careful isolation, wrapped in protocols and precautions. "They're staring," he muttered 20 minutes later as they made their entrance into the main hall. The usual buzz of conversation had died to a shocked hush as New York's social elite tried to process the sight of Kennedy Clarence not only attending his own gala properly, but doing so with a striking woman on his arm. "Let them," Billy smiled, radiant in gold. "You're rewriting your story tonight." She was right. Every step they took together across that floor rewrote 20 years of carefully maintained distance. Kennedy felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but it was manageable now, a whisper rather than a scream, a memory of fear rather than its reality. The orchestra was playing something slow and elegant, and couples had begun to move onto the dance floor. Kennedy felt Billy's subtle shift beside him, the way she swayed slightly to the music without even realizing it. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, surprising them both. Her eyes widened slightly. "Kennedy, are you sure? That's a lot of close contact, a lot of movement." "I'm sure." He turned to face her, offering his hand with all the ceremony this moment deserved. "Dr. Coco, would you do me the honor?" The smile that broke across her face was worth every moment of fear he'd ever felt. She placed her hand in his, letting him lead her onto the dance floor as whispers erupted around them like wind through leaves. The first steps were tentative, both of them hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. Kennedy's hand rested lightly on her waist, hers on his shoulder, their other hands clasped together as they began to move to the music. "Breathe," Billy whispered, and Kennedy realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it out slowly, feeling his body relax into the rhythm of the dance. "I haven't done this in 20 years, he admitted quietly. "You haven't done a lot of things in 20 years, she replied with that fierce tenderness he'd come to rely on. "But you're doing them now. That's what matters." As they moved together, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Kennedy forgot about the watching crowds, the pressing cameras, the weight of expectations and speculation. All that existed was the warmth of Billy in his arms, the soft swish of her gold dress against his legs, the way her eyes held his with complete trust and understanding. "The board is having collective heart attacks," he murmured, catching glimpses of his executives' shocked faces as they turned. "Good." Billy's smile turned mischievous. "They deserve some surprises after that hotel stunt they pulled." Kennedy found himself chuckling, the sound rich and real in a way it hadn't been for years. "You're a dangerous woman, Dr. Coco. And you're a brave man, Mr. Clarence." She moved slightly closer, her perfume wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. "Braver than you give yourself credit for." The music shifted to something slower, more intimate. Without conscious thought, Kennedy drew Billy closer until their bodies moved as one, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. The contact should have triggered his symptoms. Would have, just months ago. Instead, it felt like coming home. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed softly, the words meant only for her. "Dancing, touching, just being close to someone. I'd convinced myself it was impossible." Billy lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes he saw not just the brilliant doctor who had helped heal him, but the woman who had done something far more miraculous. She had made him want to heal himself. "Nothing's impossible," she said, her voice carrying that blend of strength and softness that was uniquely hers. "Sometimes we just need someone to help us see past our own walls." They danced through 3 more songs, each one bringing them closer together, each moment proving that the impossible was possible after all. Kennedy was vaguely aware of photos being taken, of speculation running wild through the crowd, of his board members huddled in corners having intense discussions. None of it mattered. What mattered was the way Billy fit perfectly in his arms, how her heart beat steady and strong against his chest, how natural it felt to hold her close and move together as if they'd been doing this all their lives. "Your mother would be proud," Billy said suddenly, softly, "seeing you here, living fully instead of just existing." The mention of his mother didn't bring the usual pain. Instead, Kennedy felt a warm rush of memory. His mother teaching him to dance in their living room, telling him that someday he'd find someone worth dancing with. "She would have loved you," he replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. "Your fierce heart, your determination to help others heal. Like mother, like son." Billy's hand squeezed his gently. She raised a man who built an empire while fighting impossible odds, who never gave up, even when the world told him he had to live with limitations. The orchestra began another piece, but Kennedy found himself leading Billy off the dance floor toward the museum's magnificent glass walls. The city sprawled beyond them, a tapestry of lights under the velvet sky. "Thank you," he said simply, still holding her close, "for dancing with you." Her smile held questions. "For making me brave enough to dance again. For showing me that some walls are meant to come down. For ... He paused, gathering courage for words he hadn't spoken in 20 years. "For making me feel safe enough to feel everything I've been afraid to feel." Billy turned in his arms to face him fully, the city lights creating a halo around her. "Kennedy, I know it's fast," he continued quickly. "I know we're still figuring out what this is, how much of it is doctor and patient, how much is—" "More?" she finished softly. "Do you want to know what I think?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "I think labels don't matter. Doctor, patient, friends, more. They're just words. What matters is this." She placed her hand over his heart, steady and warm. "What matters is that when I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The gala continued behind them, music and laughter floating through the ancient temple space. But Kennedy and Billy remained by the windows, holding each other close, proving with every breath that some conditions could be healed, some walls could crumble, and some loves were worth waiting 20 years to find. When they finally rejoined the party, something had shifted between them. Something subtle but profound. They moved together, as if they'd been doing it all their lives, his hand finding the small of her back, her steps matching his perfectly. The watching crowd saw a miracle. Kennedy Clarence, not just surviving a woman's touch, but thriving in it. But Kennedy and Billy knew the real miracle was simpler and more profound. Two hearts learning to trust, to heal, and perhaps to love without limits. The Temple of Dender had stood for thousands of years, witnessing countless moments of human connection. Tonight, it witnessed another. The moment when a man who couldn't love discovered that perhaps he had been capable of it all along. He just needed the right person to help him remember how. Chapter 10. Falling. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Kennedy's office, casting long shadows across the space where his life had changed forever months ago when Billy first stormed in. He stood in the same spot he'd occupied that day, but everything else was different now. The medical equipment that had once been a permanent fixture was gone. The air purification system had been disabled. The protocols that had governed his life for 20 years were slowly being dismantled, one barrier at a time. "The latest test results are remarkable," Marcus said from his position by Kennedy's desk, spreading out charts and data sheets. "Your immune system is completely normal when you're with her. It's like your body finally understands she's not a threat." Kennedy barely heard him. His attention was fixed on the street below, where Billy was just emerging from her car. Even from 60 stories up, he would know her anywhere, the confident stride, the way she commanded attention without trying. His body's reaction to her presence was instantaneous, but not in the way it once had been. Now his pulse quickened with anticipation rather than fear, his breath caught with desire rather than panic. "You're not fixing me," he'd told her one evening in her lab, watching her analyze his blood work. "I'm not your research project." "No," Billy had agreed, perching on his desk with that fierce grace that always caught him off guard. "You're the man I'm falling in love with. The research just helped me get close enough to do that." The admission hung between them, weighty with possibility. Now, watching her enter his building, Kennedy felt the truth of those words echo in every beat of his heart. The intercom buzzed. "Dr. Coco is on her way up," James announced, no longer needing to warn his boss about female visitors. "Send her in when she arrives," Kennedy replied, not moving from his spot by the window. He heard Marcus gathering his papers, preparing to give them privacy. "Don't forget the board meeting at 2, Marcus reminded him. "They'll want to discuss the new joint venture proposal, Clarence Coco Biomedical Research." The name still felt like a dream, or perhaps like waking from one. 20 years of isolation transformed into a partnership that could help countless others struggling with psychosomatic conditions. The door opened, and jasmine filled the air. Kennedy didn't turn, but he felt Billy's presence like sunshine on his skin. "You're brooding," she observed, moving to stand beside him. "What's wrong?" "You're not fixing me," he said again, turning to face her. She wore a simple cream suit that somehow made her look both professional and utterly alluring. "I'm not your research project." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Is that what's bothering you, Kennedy?" "The board sees you as my miracle cure. The press calls you the woman who healed the untouchable CEO. Even Marcus talks about test results and immune responses." He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its perfect arrangement. "But that's not what this is it?" "You know it's not." Billy moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "Yes, I helped you understand your condition. Yes, my research provided a framework for healing, but that's not why I'm here now." "Why are you here?" The question came out rougher than he intended, laden with 20 years of doubt and fear. Instead of answering immediately, Billy reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that would have sent him into shock months ago. Now it felt intimate, natural, necessary. "I'm here because somewhere between breaking into your office and dancing with you at the gala, I fell in love with the man behind the walls," she said simply. "Not the CEO, not the medical mystery, not the billionaire who couldn't love. Just you, Kennedy, with all your scars and strength and beautiful, brave heart." The words hit him like a physical force, breaking through the last of his defenses. Without conscious thought, he reached for her, pulling her close with a desperation that surprised them both. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed against her hair. "Every instinct I've developed over 20 years tells me to run, to protect myself, to maintain distance." "But you're not running." Her hands came up to frame his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You're standing right here, holding me, choosing to feel everything you've been afraid of feeling. That's not weakness, Kennedy. That's the kind of strength that moves mountains." He looked down at this remarkable woman who had crashed into his life and rearranged everything he thought he knew about himself. "The board wants to make you head of research for the new venture." "I know." Her smile held that mix of fierce intelligence and gentle understanding that never failed to undo him. "They offered me the position yesterday. And I told them I needed to discuss it with my partner first." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, sending shivers of pleasure through him. "Not my research subject, not my patient, not my CEO, my partner." The word settled between them, full of promise and possibility. Kennedy thought about all the partnerships in his life, business alliances, medical relationships, the careful distance he'd maintained even with friends like Marcus. This was different. This was... "I love you," he said suddenly, the words surprising them both. "Not because you helped heal me, not because you understood my condition when no one else did. I love you because you saw me, really saw me. When I was still hiding behind walls I thought I needed." Billy's eyes widened, then softened with emotion. "Say it again." "I love you." Easier this time, like his heart had just been waiting for permission to speak its truth. I love your brilliant mind and your fierce heart. I love how you never let me hide behind excuses. I love that you understand healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about learning to live fully despite our scars." She rose on her toes to press her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the space between words. "I love you too, all of you, the strength and the fear, the walls and the courage it takes to let them down." The morning sun painted patterns across their entwined figures, turning the moment golden. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual energy, unaware that in a tower high above its streets, a man who had forgotten how to love was remembering with every beat of his healing heart. "The press will have a field day," Kennedy murmured, his hands tracing patterns on her back. "Billionaire CEO falls for the doctor who cured him. It's like something out of a romance novel." Billy laughed, the sound rich and real against his chest. "Let them talk. They'll never understand the real story, how two people with different kinds of scars helped each other heal. How love isn't about fixing someone, it's about creating a safe space for them to fix themselves." "When did you get so wise, Doctor?" "Coco? Around the same time you got so brave, Mr. Clarence." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes dancing. "Now, are you going to keep questioning this miracle? Or are you going to kiss me?" Kennedy felt the last of his doubts melt away as he lowered his lips to hers. The contact was electric, healing, perfect. Everything a kiss should be when it's shared between two people who have fought their way through darkness to find each other. The medical files lay forgotten on his desk. The board meeting waited in the future. And somewhere in the city, researchers were preparing laboratories for their joint venture. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way Billy fit perfectly in his arms, how her heart beat steady and strong against his chest, how natural it felt to hold her close and love her without fear or limitation. 20 years of isolation had taught Kennedy Clarence that love was dangerous, that connection meant pain, that walls were necessary for survival. But in the warm morning light of his office, holding the woman who had helped him remember how to feel, he realized that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply letting yourself fall, knowing that the right person would be there to catch you. "No more fixing," he whispered against her lips. "Just loving." "Just loving," she agreed, and in those words lay every promise they needed to make. The sun continued its journey across the Manhattan sky, painting their world in shades of possibility. In Kennedy's office, where his story had once been defined by what he couldn't do, couldn't feel, couldn't have, a new chapter was being written. One where love wasn't a cure, but a choice. Where healing wasn't about fixing, but understanding. And where two hearts that had known loss could find their way home in each other's arms. Chapter 11. Healing rain poured over Manhattan in sheets, transforming the city's streets into mirrors that reflected the gleaming towers above. Kennedy stood in the lobby of Clarence Tower, watching droplets race down the vast glass windows while his mind raced with possibilities. The board meeting had just ended, a marathon session where they'd finalized the details of Clarence Coco biomedical research. Everything was falling into place, the funding, the facilities, the future they dreamed of building together. Yet something still felt unfinished, incomplete. His phone buzzed with a message from Billy. "Meet me outside." No umbrella needed. Kennedy smiled, recognizing her flair for the dramatic. She'd been in the meeting too, presenting their research with that fierce brilliance that never failed to captivate him. But she'd slipped out early, citing another appointment, leaving him to wonder what she was planning. The doorman reached for an umbrella as Kennedy approached the entrance, but he waved it away. Outside, the rain immediately soaked through his expensive suit, plastering his carefully styled hair to his forehead. But for once in his life, Kennedy Clarence didn't care about maintaining perfect control. Billy stood in the middle of the plaza, face turned up to the sky, letting the rain wash over her. She'd removed her jacket, and her silk blouse clung to her curves in a way that made Kennedy's breath catch. When she heard his footsteps, she turned, and the smile that broke across her face was brighter than any ray of sun. "You're crazy," he called over the sound of falling rain. "We'll both catch pneumonia." Sometimes crazy is exactly what we need. She moved toward him with that natural grace that had first caught his attention. "Do you know what today is?" Kennedy thought for a moment, then understanding dawned. 6 months since you stormed into my office. 6 months since you started proving that nothing is impossible. She stopped just out of reach, rain creating diamonds in her hair. 6 months of watching you choose bravery over fear, healing over hiding, love over isolation. Billy! He stepped closer, drawn to her like gravity. "What are you doing?" "Making a point." Her eyes held that mix of challenge and tenderness that never failed to undo him. 6 months ago, you couldn't be in the same room as a woman without going into shock. Now look at us, standing in the rain, starting a company together, building a future neither of us thought possible. She was right. Even a year ago, the idea of standing in the rain with a woman would have been unthinkable. Now his body's only reaction to Billy's presence was a desperate need to be closer. "You changed everything," he said softly, reaching out to brush a raindrop from her cheek. "No." She caught his hand, holding it against her face. "You changed everything. I just helped you remember that you could." The rain fell harder, but neither of them moved. Water ran down their faces like tears of joy, washing away the last traces of fear and doubt that had kept them apart. "When my mother died," Kennedy found himself saying, "I thought I'd never feel safe loving anyone again. The pain was too much, too overwhelming. My body created the perfect defense. Make it physically impossible to get close to women, and I'd never have to risk that kind of loss again." "But you're not that scared teenager anymore," Billy reminded him gently. "You're a man who built an empire while fighting impossible odds, who never gave up, even when the world told him he had to live with limitations. A man who fell in love with the one woman, brave enough to break through his walls," he added, pulling her closer. Billy's hands came up to frame his face, her touch warm despite the cold rain. "Your walls were never as strong as you thought they were. They were built on fear, and love is always stronger than fear." Kennedy looked at this remarkable woman who had changed his world, really looked at her. Rain had soaked her completely, making her dress cling to every curve. Her makeup had washed away, leaving her natural beauty exposed. Her eyes held the same fierce determination they'd had the day she'd first stormed into his office, but now they held something else too, something that looked a lot like love. "I want to try something," he said softly. Billy's smile was knowing, challenging. "Then try it." Moving with deliberate slowness, giving his body time to accept each new sensation, Kennedy lowered his head until their faces were inches apart. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, but it was different now. Anticipation rather than fear, desire rather than panic. Their first kiss happened in the rain, because Billy had a flair for the dramatic, and Kennedy had a lifetime of moments to make up for. His lips found hers with gentle precision, testing, exploring, discovering. The contact sent electricity through his entire body, but instead of rejecting it, he welcomed it. This was what healing felt like, not the absence of fear, but the courage to feel everything anyway. Billy responded with a soft sound that made his heart race, her hands sliding into his rain-soaked hair to pull him closer. The kiss deepened, became something more primal and passionate than either of them had expected. 20 years of untouched emotions poured out of Kennedy as he wrapped his arms around her, lifting her slightly off her feet to better angle their mouths together. The rain continued to fall, but they barely noticed. They were lost in their own world, where touch meant healing, and kisses could break curses, and love was stronger than any fear. Kennedy's hands learned the curves of Billy's body, while his lips memorized the taste of rain on her skin. Her fingers traced patterns on his back, each touch erasing another scar from his past. When they finally broke apart, breathing heavily, the world seemed transformed. The rain had turned golden in the late afternoon light, creating halos around the street lamps that were beginning to flicker on. Pedestrians hurried past with umbrellas and curious glances, some recognizing the CEO, who was famous for not being able to touch women, now holding one in a very public display of affection. "Well," Billy said, her voice husky with emotion, "I'd say that's progress." Kennedy laughed, the sound rich and free in a way it hadn't been in decades. "Is that your professional opinion, Doctor? Coco?" "That's my very personal opinion as the woman who just got thoroughly kissed in the rain by Kennedy Clarence." She reached up to trace his lips with gentle fingers. "Want to know my next observation?" "Always. You're not running away." Her smile was radiant despite the rain still falling around them. "You're not checking your symptoms or reaching for medication. You're just here, present, feeling everything without fear." She was right, he realized. His body's usual panic response was completely absent, replaced by a different kind of awareness, one that made him acutely conscious of every point where Billy's body pressed against his, every breath they shared, every beat of their hearts finding a common rhythm. "I think," he said slowly, "that's because my body finally understands what my heart's been trying to tell it. You're not a threat to be feared. You're home." Billy's eyes filled with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "Say that again." "You're my home," Kennedy repeated, the words feeling more right with each passing moment. "Not my cure, not my savior, not my doctor. Just home. The place where I can finally be myself, without walls or fear or limitation." She rose on her toes to kiss him again, softer this time but no less passionate. When she pulled back, her eyes held that fierce light he'd come to love. "Want to know a secret?" "Always. You're my home too." Her fingers played with the wet hair at the nape of his neck, the place where my mind and heart can work together instead of fighting each other, where I don't have to choose between being a doctor and being a woman who loves deeply, completely, without reservation. The rain was beginning to ease, but neither of them moved to seek shelter. They stood in their own private world, holding each other close, proving with every breath that some conditions could be healed, some walls could crumble, and some loves were worth waiting a lifetime to find. "We should probably go inside," Kennedy said eventually, though he made no move to let her go. "Before we both end up with actual medical conditions to treat." Billy laughed, the sound echoing off the wet buildings around them. The great Kennedy Clarence, worried about a little rain. "Where's your sense of adventure? I think you've given me enough adventure to last a lifetime." But he was smiling as he said it, his hands still tracing patterns on her rain-soaked back. "Oh, my love," she said softly, "we're just getting started." And there in the rain, holding each other close while the city moved around them in its eternal dance, Kennedy and Billy began writing a new chapter in their story, one where healing wasn't about fixing what was broken, but about learning to love with all their scars and strengths combined. The rain had washed away the last traces of fear, leaving behind something stronger, braver, and infinitely more beautiful. Two hearts that had found their way home in each other's arms, proving that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from medical breakthroughs or scientific understanding, but from the simple, profound act of choosing love over fear, again and again and again. Chapter 12. Love Without Limits. The New York skyline sparkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. In Kennedy's penthouse, candles flickered everywhere, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Their soft glow reflected in the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an intimate universe high above the city. Kennedy stood by the windows, watching the city lights blur through the glass, his heart pounding with anticipation. The medical equipment that had once dominated his private space was gone, replaced by hundreds of candles and scattered rose petals, a scene he'd spent hours perfecting. The elevator chimed softly, announcing Billy's arrival. She stepped out, and Kennedy's breath caught in his throat. She wore a deep burgundy dress that hugged every curve, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that captured him, dark and luminous in the candlelight, filled with an emotion that made his pulse race. "You've been busy," she observed, taking in the transformed space. "I wanted tonight to be special." Kennedy moved toward her, drawn by the magnetic pull that had only grown stronger since their kiss in the rain. No medical protocols, no business discussions, no walls between us. Billy met him halfway, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. Through his silk shirt, he could feel the warmth of her touch, a sensation that once would have sent him into shock, but now only made him want more. "How did you manage all this?" she asked, gesturing to the hundreds of candles. "I may have had some help." He smiled, remembering Marcus's knowing look when he'd explained his plans. "Turns out my staff is quite romantic when given the chance." Her laugh was soft and warm. The untouchable CEO arranging candlelit surprises. What would the board say? "I don't care." Kennedy's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. "I've spent 20 years caring what others would say, letting fear dictate my choices. Tonight is about us, just us." Billy's eyes softened as she reached up to trace his jawline. "And what exactly did you have in mind for tonight?" Instead of answering, Kennedy lowered his head to capture her lips in a kiss that held none of his usual hesitation. This kiss was different, deeper, more passionate, filled with all the desire he'd suppressed for so long. His hands slid up her back, feeling the silken warmth of her skin through her dress. Billy responded with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pressed closer. The contact sent fire through Kennedy's veins, but instead of fighting it, he welcomed the heat. His body, once programmed to reject any female touch, now craved her presence like oxygen. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "Not just parts of you, all of you. The brilliant doctor who helped heal me, the fierce woman who challenged me, the gentle soul who understood my scars without trying to erase them." "Show me," Billy breathed, her eyes dark with desire. "Show me how much you love me." Kennedy's heart thundered in his chest as he lifted her into his arms, carrying her through the candle-lit space to his bedroom. The city lights painted patterns across the silk sheets, creating a private galaxy just for them. He laid her down gently, taking a moment to appreciate how she looked against his sheets, like art coming to life, like every dream he'd never dared to dream. Her burgundy dress spread around her like spilled wine, her skin glowing golden in the candlelight. "You're trembling," she observed softly, reaching for him. "Not from fear," he assured her, joining her on the bed. "Never from fear. Not with you." Their lips met again, and this time there was no holding back. Clothes fell away like abandoned walls, revealing skin that burned to be touched. Kennedy's hands explored every curve and valley of her body, memorizing the map of her with fingers and lips. Billy's touch was equally passionate, equally reverent. She traced the planes of his chest, the strong lines of his back, erasing 20 years of isolation with each caress. When she pressed kisses along his neck, Kennedy gasped not from panic, but from pleasure. "How do you feel?" she whispered, ever the doctor even in this intimate moment. Alive, he answered truthfully. More alive than I've ever been. They moved together as if they'd been loving each other for lifetimes, finding a rhythm as natural as breathing. Every touch, every kiss, every shared breath proved that love was stronger than fear, that healing was possible, that some walls were meant to crumble. The city continued its eternal dance below them, but in Kennedy's penthouse, time seemed to stop. There was only this, the warmth of skin on skin, the whispered words of love and need, the profound joy of two hearts finally beating as one. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets with the first hints of dawn painting the sky, Kennedy held Billy close and marveled at how completely his life had changed. The man who couldn't bear a woman's touch was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't imagine not touching, not loving, not feeling everything fully and deeply. "What are you thinking?" Billy asked, tracing patterns on his chest. "I'm thinking about the day you stormed into my office," he replied, kissing her temple. "How scared I was, how angry, how certain that nothing could ever change. And now? Now I know that change isn't about losing who you are. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be." His arms tightened around her. "I was meant to love you, Billy Coco. Every moment of fear, every wall I built, every step of my journey led me to you." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "And I was meant to find you, to help you remember that love isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about creating something beautiful from all our pieces combined." As the sun rose over Manhattan, painting their world in shades of gold and promise, Kennedy and Billy held each other close, their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. They had moved beyond doctor and patient, beyond healer and healed, to become something far more powerful, two souls who had found their way home in each other's arms. The medical files that had once defined their relationship lay forgotten in another room, replaced by scattered clothes and rose petals and the lingering scent of candles. They had written a new story together, not about a billionaire who couldn't love, but about two hearts brave enough to choose love over fear, healing over hiding, and the profound joy of loving without limits. "I love you," Kennedy whispered. A soft morning light painted patterns across their entwined bodies. "With everything I am, everything I was, and everything I'm becoming because of you." "And I love you," Billy replied, sealing her words with a kiss that held all the passion of the night and all the promise of their future. "My brave, beautiful heart, my home." In the gentle light of dawn, their love story continued to unfold, not ending but beginning anew with each shared breath, each tender touch, each moment of choosing love over fear. For in the end, that was the greatest healing of all, not the absence of scars, but the courage to love deeply, completely, without limitation or fear, today and all the days to come. Subscribe if you loved.